Hello everyone. I am here to talk about primary sources. So submitting your primary source was due on November 3rd, but there seems to have been some questions about the primary sources. So I am going to post this with a little bit of explanation about the sources and what constitutes a primary source and what kind of sources are good for this assignment. And then I'm going to give you a little bit more time to get that submitted since there were some questions about the primary source. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get to the information. So if you click on the signature assignment button, it will take you to a page that has instructions for writing the essay. We will address writing the essay a little bit later in another video where I'll talk about that more specifically. And we'll talk about plagiarism. But if you scroll down here to the bottom, then and you click next actually, then you'll get to a screen that says finding a primary and then a primary source documents lesson PowerPoint, which I'm gonna walk us through here a little bit. And I'm just gonna kind of skim over this PowerPoint, but I highly encourage you to go back to it and read through it because it's got really good information for analyzing primary sources too, and that will be important for writing the essay. So, primary sources. What is a primary source to begin with? So, a primary source is basically a document, an artifact, some source of information that was created at or near the time period being studied by oftentimes the people who are being studied, or at least very close observers of events being studied. All history is based on primary sources. All good history is based on primary sources. And primary sources cover a wide range of things that can tell us different things about the past. So primary and secondary sources are the two large categories of sources that we use in history. And historians will often use both primary and secondary sources in their research. So primary sources are actual records that have survived from the past, letters, photographs, clothing, pictures, anything like that. A secondary source is an account of the past or an argument about the past by people that are writing after, usually historians, but anyone really writing after an event about a previous or a past event is writing a secondary source. So your essays that you write in a history class would be classified as secondary sources about events. And secondary sources often rely on primary sources for their information. So one of the more prominent secondary sources that we deal with in class are textbooks. Your history textbook is written by someone, or in most cases a group of people, who are writing about events that took place long before, and it includes references to primary sources. So you can see direct quotes, excerpts from historical documents, photographs of artifacts, and other things like that in your textbook. And so the textbook is telling the story of history and referring to these primary sources to help tell that story. So people in the past leave various clues about their lives that we can then use to infer something about the period they were living in. And these can be really formal things like books or personal documents, government documents, letters. They could be somewhat informal like oral accounts or diaries, photographs, even things like novels, short stories, forms of literature can tell us something about the period that produced them. Things that people use every day, dishes, glasses, coins, stamps, all of these things can help to put together some kind of story about the past. So for this assignment, and we're going to look more at this presentation when we get to the to talking about the essay and actually analyzing primary sources. But for this assignment, finding a primary source, I want you to think about something that interests you. Now, the primary source has to be from a period covered within this class. So it can be Native American, which may be challenging because a lot of those sources are not going to be written, but rather they're going to be artifacts. So they will be a little bit more difficult, but not impossible, all the way up through the Reconstruction period of the Civil War. All of that is open as far as a time period. You want to be able to pick a source that has enough information in it so that you have plenty of things to talk about in your paper. Something that's very short can make it difficult to get a lot or to glean a lot of information from. There are a number of things at your fingertips for you to use to find primary sources. There's a Questia app that can be found on that menu on the right-hand side of your MindTap. If you scroll down, you'll find Questia. They have places to find primary sources. You can use individual websites to find primary sources. So if you're interested in a particular person, especially something like a president, you can go to, for example, for Thomas Jefferson, the Monticello website, monticello.org, has a lot of his personal papers that have been digitized and things like that. Those would all count as primary sources. The Library of Congress has excellent resources for primary sources, but the Navarro College Library also has resources, online resources for finding primary sources as well. And those are relatively easy to use. There's also the Pierce Civil War Museum on campus, if you're in Corsicana, that will have stuff from that period there. So there's a lot of different places you can go to find these primary sources. Now, this assignment is most easily accomplished if you use a letter or a diary entry or a speech, something that's printed in a document, but you can also use an image or a print or an artifact. Those are completely open to you. You're not required to use a letter or diary entry or speech. Those are just the easiest sources to pull information from. So whatever it is, you need to make sure that it's a standalone item and not one of a set. Or if you do have a set, pick maybe one or two examples from the set. Because if it's too big, then you will write probably too big a paper, or you won't be able to cover all of it in the amount that you want to write. So once you've picked your source, then I want you to, when you go to turn this in, open up, you can see the submission box there, or you can type this up in a Word document and upload it, whichever you'd like to do. Just describe in a paragraph or two what's going on in your source, provide a citation for your primary source, and then provide citations for two potential secondary sources that deal with the primary source you're looking at. So if, for example, we go to the Navarro College, the library website, and we're going to look for a primary source. Hopefully this will open up in a timely manner and we'll be able to get to the library website. All right. So I'm going to go over here to quick links and the library. So when you get to the library, let's say that you want to use as your primary source something by, let's say, Alexander Hamilton. Maybe you really like the musical. And so you can go in here and you can type in the name of a person if there's a particular event that you're interested in or something like that. Any kind of general thing. If you're accessing from outside the college, well, that was weird, then you will have to use this proxy login if you are accessing from outside the college. If you're at home, oftentimes you'll be asked to log in there with what used to be your Blackboard login. All right, so here is all the stuff that they have on Alexander Hamilton, over 100,000 articles there. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this one here. If you're going to do anything about Alexander Hamilton, this is a pretty go-to secondary source, a very thorough biography of him. So if you're doing anything about him, then that's going to be a good secondary source to use. So you go over here to source types and you click show more. And you want to click over here on primary source documents and then tell it to update. And that's going to pull out just over 1,000 sources for Alexander Hamilton. So here we have Hamilton's Plan of Union. Here we have something that he wrote about the unjust treatment of loyalists, which that sounds pretty interesting. You have the Federalist Papers, which are probably the most prominent Alexander Hamilton source, report on manufacturers, on the constitutionality of an act to establish a bank. All of these things count as primary sources. I am interested in this one, the unjust treatment of loyalists. And so I'm going to click on that, and here you can see an abstract which presents the text of a paper written by Hamilton to the citizens of New York State protesting the unjust treatment of loyalists in 1784. So this is after the Revolution. And there's two things that you want to note on the library website. First of all, you want to make sure that you can get the full text of your document somewhere. So if I go over here and click on HTML full text, it should take me to a page, where you can see this paper that Alexander Hamilton wrote about the unjust treatment of loyalists there. And you can print that out and read it. You can also have it read to you there. The other thing that I want you to note is over here on the right hand side where it says cite. If I click on this, it will open up a little box here with citation format. So in history, traditionally we used APA style formatting, but I've written in the assignment MLA since that's what most students are familiar with. So if we scroll down here, here is a citation for this source that I'm looking at, the unjust treatment of loyalists, in MLA format. So you just copy that and you can put it into the text box for the citation for your primary source. All right. So that's finding the primary source. So as I mentioned before, if we go back to our results list, the biography by Ron Chernow, if you're going to go for anything to do with Alexander Hamilton, then he is a great source. It's a very thorough biography of Hamilton. So I might put a citation down for this one as a secondary source. And again, you can do the same thing. If you click on that source, you'll get the page here. This one is available in the actual library. Retrieve the catalog item. That refers to the actual physical library. No matter what Navarro College campus you're on, if you're at Corsicana, you can just go to the library and look for the source. But if you are in Mexia, if you're in Midlothian, if you're in Waxahachie, you can do inter-campus loans for library books. You can go and ask for this book and you'll get it within a matter of days. So you can still access these sources there. This book is also really easy to come by in most bookstores. You can probably get it used relatively cheap as well. But the same thing here, I asked for 2 citations for possible secondary sources, so I can do the same thing. Go over here to Cite, scroll down to MLA, and there's the citation for that secondary source. So if I go back to results list, and let's say I want to find something that more specifically deals with loyalists. So I might do a search with Alexander Hamilton loyalists on it. since that's my primary source, maybe I can find a secondary source. And probably have to look a little bit further into these in order to find them. Although when you're looking at these little icons here give you a good idea of what you're going to be looking for. Academic journals are some of the best sources, secondary sources that you can use, because academic journals get published far more frequently than books do. And so the latest ideas from historians are going to appear in academic journals. Periodicals are also good, depending on the periodical. You'll get certain types of information and so on. You may want to avoid reviews because these are essentially book reviews of things that have already been published. Of books that have been published. Now these can be really good if you're considering using that book as a source to read the review on the book before you go out and find it, but the review in and of itself is not going to be an excellent secondary source. So you want to stick with journals, periodicals, or books for the most part. So again, you can always go in there to find the source pages. You can get your citation from the library website really easily, and you also want to make sure always that there's full text so you can actually read the source. If you're using other websites, the same concepts apply, although you may have to write your own citations and so on as well. You can also save these sources to your Google Drives. And things like that. You can also, if you create an account with EBSCO, which is usually the database we're in, if you create an account with EBSCO, you can save them to your folder up here as well. So that's finding a primary source. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and open up a little bit more time for those of you that were confused about finding the sources. Hopefully this video has helped. And for those of you that have already submitted it, if you want to make some changes having watched this video, then you're more than welcome to do that as well. So I will update that assignment to be due on the 7th, give you a couple of extra days to have a look at it. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And I will speak to you again where we'll talk about the actual analyzing of the source in another video.